All right, welcome back, everybody. Ready for another deep dive?
Definitely. Always up for exploring something new.
Well, today we're tackling something that I think everyone listening can relate to on some level, and that's self-sabotage.
Ooh, that's a juicy one. We all have those moments, right?
Exactly. And to help us unpack it all, we're turning to Brianna Wiest's book, The Mountain Is You.
The mountain is you. I like that imagery.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful. The book's main idea is that self-sabotage is kind of like this mountain we have to climb if we want to reach our full potential.
Okay, I'm intrigued. But what makes it a mountain?
Well, Weist's point is that we're often the ones building that mountain in the first place. Like we create these obstacles for ourselves out of fear and limiting beliefs.
So we're basically standing in our own way.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to dig into today. And I've got to say, some of the stuff Weist talks about in this book is really eye-opening. Like, have you ever noticed that sometimes when things are going really well in your life, you suddenly hit a wall?
Oh, all the time. It's almost like I can't let myself be too happy or successful.
Well, you're not alone. Weist calls this the upper limit problem.
Okay, now I need to hear more about this upper limit problem.
So the idea is that we all kind of have this subconscious limit for how much happiness, success, or love we believe we deserve. And when we start getting close to that limit, it triggers all sorts of fear and anxiety.
So it's almost like a self-preservation mechanism, right? Like we're afraid of the unknown if we go beyond that limit.
Exactly. And that's when the self-sabotage kicks in. We unconsciously start creating problems or making bad decisions
Mm.
to bring ourselves back down to that level where we feel safe, even if it's not really serving us.
Wow, it's so interesting how much of this stuff happens on a subconscious level. It's almost like we're working against ourselves without even realizing it.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. And Weiss doesn't stop there. She goes on to talk about how all of this ties back to our emotions, which I thought was super interesting.
Emotions. Okay, I'm curious. What's the connection?
Well, she argues that those negative emotions we often try so hard to push away, like anxiety, frustration, sadness, they're actually trying to tell us something important.
Like they have a purpose.
Yeah, exactly. Wienez says they're like signposts pointing to areas in our lives where we need to do some inner work, you know, places where we need to heal or grow.
Hmm. So instead of trying to ignore those negative emotions, we should be leaning into them, trying to understand them.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
It's kind of like when you have a splinter, right? You can try to ignore it, but it's going to keep bugging you until you finally take the time to deal with it.
I see. So how do we actually do that? Like, how do we start listening to these emotional signposts instead of just trying to silence them?
Well, that's where emotional intelligence comes in. And Wienez talks about this a lot.
Emotional intelligence, that's such a buzzword these days, but I feel like a lot of people, myself included, don't really know what it means to actually be emotionally intelligent.
Totally. It's definitely one of those things that's easier said than done. But the way I understand it is that emotional intelligence is about being able to understand your own emotions and being able to manage them effectively. It's not about suppressing your feelings, but more about being able to recognize them, figure out what they're trying to tell you, and then respond in a healthy way.
Okay, so it's like having a conversation with your emotions instead of trying to shove them in a box.
Exactly. And that's a big part of overcoming self-sabotage, according to Wiest.
Mhm.
You have to get comfortable with those uncomfortable feelings.
I can see how that would be a game changer. But how do we actually get better at this? It's one thing to say be more emotionally intelligent, but how do we actually put that into practice?
Right. Well, Wiest offers a lot of practical strategies in the book.
Oh, I like practical. Give me some examples.
Well, she talks about things like mindfulness, journaling, challenging limiting beliefs, and some others too. But one technique that really stood out to me was this journaling exercise she suggests.
Oh, a journaling exercise. Tell me more.
So, the idea is that you write down a limiting belief you have about yourself. It could be anything, like, I'm not smart enough to succeed, or I'm not worthy of love, something like that.
Okay, and then?
Then you imagine that your best friend came to you with that same belief. And you ask yourself, what would I say to them? What kind of advice or support would I offer?
Oh, wow. That's actually really clever because I think we're often much harder on ourselves than we would ever be on someone we care about.
Exactly.
Hmm.
So, by putting yourself in the role of the supportive friend, it helps you challenge those negative thoughts with more compassion and objectivity.
I like that. It's a really simple but powerful way to reframe those negative thoughts.
Totally. Another big idea in the book that I wanted to touch on is this concept of embracing discomfort.
Embracing discomfort. Well, that sounds uncomfortable.
Right. It seems kind of counterintuitive. But Wist's argument is that if you want to grow, You have to be willing to step outside your comfort zone. You can't just stay in that little bubble of familiarity forever.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But it's definitely easier said than done. Like, how do you actually push yourself to do things that feel uncomfortable?
Well, she emphasizes the importance of taking small steps. You don't have to make some massive change overnight. It's more about gradually expanding that comfort zone, little by little. Like, what's something you could do today that would feel just a little bit outside your norm?
Hmm, that's a good question. I guess it could be anything. Trying a new food I've always been hesitant to try, taking a different route to work, maybe finally signing up for that pottery class I've been thinking about. It's interesting to think about what small things can actually feel a bit scary when you really stop and consider it.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to be kind to yourself throughout this whole process. Weiss talks a lot about the importance of self-compassion.
That's so true, because you're going to stumble along the way. You're going to have setbacks.
Oh, for sure. That's just part of being human. But how do we deal with those setbacks in a way that keeps us moving forward? Like,
Yeah.
how do we prevent them from turning into self-sabotage?
Well, Wiest suggests reframing those setbacks as learning opportunities. Instead of viewing them as failures, you look at them as valuable data points. You ask yourself, okay, what can I learn from this? How can I adjust my approach moving forward?
I love that. It's all about turning those so-called failures into fuel for growth.
Exactly. And that's where that self-compassion piece comes back in. It's about being able to acknowledge those setbacks without beating yourself up about them.
Right. It's about recognizing that making mistakes is a natural part of the journey.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody's perfect, and expecting yourself to be perfect is a surefire recipe for disappointment.
Totally agree. So to recap what we've learned from the Mountie is You, we often self-sabotage because of this subconscious upper limit problem. We also learned that our negative emotions are actually trying to guide us toward growth, and that embracing discomfort, even in small ways, is crucial for breaking free from those self-imposed limitations.
And let's not forget the importance of self-compassion throughout this whole process.
Absolutely. It's like being your own best cheerleader, even when things get tough.
Now, I have a question for you, dear listener. What's one small step you can take today to confront a fear or limiting belief that might be holding you back? What's one thing you can do to embrace a little bit of discomfort and step outside your comfort zone?
Ooh, that's a great question. And remember, it doesn't have to be anything huge. Maybe it's sending that email you've been putting off, or having that difficult conversation you've been avoiding, or maybe even just acknowledging that voice of self-doubt and choosing to challenge it.
Exactly. It's those small acts of courage that can lead to big changes over time.
Well, I think that's a perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into self-sabotage. And remember, you have the power within you to climb any mountain.
That's right. Keep pushing those boundaries and embracing those uncomfortable feelings. You got this.
We'll see you next time.
See you then.